Let's speak to Mike Indian now, who's a political commentator, and James Woudhuysen, visiting professor at London South Bank University, on the Friday panel to get into that and some of the other big stories floated about this week. Mike, James, hello, good evening to you both.
Hi.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi, chaps. Thank you for being with us. Can we start there? Mike, should the Prime Minister be given a fixed penalty notice? We now know that he is personally part of the inquiries into parties in Downing Street. Were he to be given a fixed penalty notice, found to have personally breached those rules, would that be game over?
I think it would be, because for a large number of his own MPs, the rules that were in place for the last few years were hard to swallow. And the Prime Minister's staff have certainly, there's plenty of evidence to show that there was activity inside Downing Street that the police feel the need to look into. And the Prime Minister either was ignorant in presiding over this culture or he was complicit.
Well, that's really interesting you say that, right? Because you didn't say that it was morally the wrong thing for the Prime Minister to do, and therefore on principle and out of dignity and decency he should resign. You went straight to his MPs, who, you're right, I mean, there were several of them, particularly towards those Plan B restrictions just a couple of months ago, who were very critical of lockdown restrictions over the summer even, and you're saying that for those people it would be unpalatable, that and ultimately they're the ones that will continue to matter.
Yes, because between elections, it's a Conservative parliamentary party that keeps the Tory Prime Minister in office. And we've already seen a growing number of letters, perhaps as many as 40 letters, that if you read the press reports that have gone into the 1922 committee. And don't forget the dissenters around COVID regulations, the ones that were unhappiest about the rules, were those inside Boris Johnson's own parliamentary party.
But therefore, you feel, Mike, that even though he should, on principle and morally, that he perhaps wouldn't. He would leave it up to his MPs to make that call.
I think Boris Johnson would feel that, having won a landslide election victory 2 years ago, that he has every right to remain in Downing Street. However, as I say, the practical mechanism for getting rid of him, realistically, is him losing the confidence of his own parliamentary body. That's what's done for every single one of his predecessors.
James?
Well, his unpopularity in the party is one thing, and we've got to be careful even there, because the right of the Conservative Party and dissenters in the past have not amounted to a line of beans, really, when push has come to shove. But for me, the important issue is, and you raised it, Mike, is, I don't like Boris. What's new? But he was elected. As far as I'm aware, the person giving out the fixed penalty notice to the popularly elected British Prime Minister is very different from that. They are...
But he was elected by the people of Uxbridge, though, wasn't he? We have a parliamentary system here in which you vote for an MP and then a parliamentary party decides who the leader's going to be, who the Prime Minister's going to be. He wasn't elected by the country, he was elected by his constituency.
Darryl, it's important to understand that the policeman who gives him this deliciously titled fixed penalty notice, which is something I thought you and I got, actually, not the Prime Minister, the policeman is a functionary responsible to the government of the day, if I'm not mistaken, and the government is popularly elected, and then we understand that the party system creates the party leader. But the fact is, democracy is the issue here, Darryl, like with most things, and you don't have to like Boris Johnson to be nervous about him getting the Donald Trump treatment, not from big tech, censorship, which is what happened to Donald Trump, very worryingly. And I don't support Donald Trump, I support democracy. Therefore, to imagine that a policeman is somehow superior...
But hang on, the policeman wouldn't be making that decision, though, would they? The policeman would... presumably, this police inquiry will sort of fairly and accurately and independently decide whether or not Boris Johnson as an individual breached those COVID regulations.
You're presuming a lot of an inquiry. Who appointed the people doing the inquiring? How are they independent? I don't like to always copy Tony Benn, but are you sure that they're inquiring?
Well, I mean, you have
police
to,
investigation.
I take the point you're making there, James. But we sort of at least a shred of us has to believe that the police force are and can be independent. And let's just for a moment, because we're dealing with real hypotheticals there, aren't we? Let's for a moment assume that it is independent, that it does independently find that Boris Johnson has broken lockdown restrictions himself and issues him a penalty notice in that process. That's not the police saying that the Prime Minister has to resign. That's then a decision for him or his party.
He shouldn't. That's why he shouldn't resign if he's given a fixed penalty notice. because the hand of the police and this criminal investigation is not subject in any way to the popular will.
No, but
and its independence must be questioned, Darryl, at all times.
Okay, that's fair, James. You're perfectly entitled to do that. But the police aren't deciding that he should go. The police are finding the police would be finding him to have broken the rules, right? Yeah. So that's the police. Police find he's broken the rules. That's their job done. It's then the point that he has broken the rules then puts pressure on him to decide that is not, he can no longer govern.
You're looking at it in completely legalistic terms, Darryl, if I may be so rude, right? The point is, who's running the country, the police or the Prime Minister? You don't have to like the Prime Minister to favour the Prime Minister running the country.
But the police aren't deciding whether he should resign. They're deciding whether he'd done something wrong.
Yeah. But I'm saying he shouldn't resign just because the police go around there with a ticket. Right. Okay. And because they judge him to have broken the lockdown rules. What we think of him and the lockdown rules, his double standards, his hypocrisy.
But what you're describing there, James, is that from top to bottom or otherwise, that you have no faith in the police to make an independent judgment on that, and therefore any judgment that they make.
It's not just that. I'm not cynical, right? But I remain suspicious, okay? You yourself are unable to say who is on the inquiry, how it was conducted, and so on. But I take your point. Let's agree with the police that he broke the law, he deserves a fixed penalty notice. A cop is going to go round his door, give it to him. It's all going to be hilarious and embarrassing, which is what we expect of Boris, right? The question is that a precedent that we want to set with the police and our elected leaders, elected by the device that you describe? It's a very dangerous precedent to set, Darryl. And of course the police are not responsible for him resigning. That's a political decision for him to make. He won't make it on the grounds that I'm saying he shouldn't resign, namely that democracy is superior.
What do you mean by precedent? What precedent gets set?
Well, I don't know whether you've thought about it, but when the police assume more control over elected members of Parliament than the elected members of Parliament and the government, then you're making sure that the executive and also the judiciary are superior to the legislature.
But they're just judging him to have done something wrong. Whether he resigns, whether he resigns is then his decision. Whether his MPs,
we, not the police, are the ultimate judge of that. It's called democracy, where actually an arm of the state is not allowed, just like that, to go round the Prime Minister's door and say, fixed penalty's not so bad. But, we're not a banana republic where the police and the military...
But hang on, but the police would simply be finding...
Why not let Mike in? Because I'm sure he's got something.
Go on then, Mike. What do you think? What's your response to James's point? I'm confused by it, but go on, Mike. What's your point?
We draw these lines again and again for when we think Boris Johnson should resign, and James is right. It's an entirely political matter. We do have a named Metropolitan Police Officer leading the inquiry. The Met have a very confused line of accountability. The Commission is responsible to both the Home Secretary and the Mayor of London, and we've seen that this week as well. Fundamentally, though, whether Boris Johnson remains as leader of the Conservative Party first and foremost is going to come down to how his party price in his considerable assets versus considerable risks. If he continues to do poorly in the polls, if Keir Starmer and Labour continue to poll strongly and have a poor performance in the May elections, that's going to weaken his position further. If there is a fixed penalty notice issued, and we have to say if at this point we do not know what the outcome of this inquiry will be, it may exonerate him entirely, and that in that case this all blows over. He may have been entirely ignorant to what happened to these gatherings. We are supposing a lot of things in this as well. Then he can carry on. But Boris Johnson has time and again courted controversy as well. And his behaviour, I think, is something that we must judge here if we're going to talk about a moral dimension. The untruth that he repeated in Parliament using parliamentary privilege, which I know James will agree with me is a very important component of our democracy, a very important tool that's available to our parliamentarians. Boris Johnson exploited that to repeat an untruth about his main political opponent that was then repeated in rather ugly scenes outside Parliament earlier this week when Keir Starmer and David Lammy were surrounded in that car.
That's too much much of a stretch. You really think that a speech by Boris Johnson is attended to
James,
much by some...
James, I said that it was repeated by Boris Johnson. I didn't say that he rallied the mob. I'm just saying that he chose to repeat an untruth in Parliament where he was free from the consequences of making that decision. He used his pulpit to repeat an untruth. That's all he did. But even then, I think that as with Donald Trump or anyone else who uses any sort of platform to spread disinformation and untruths, it is thoroughly irresponsible. And also, I would dare say, very cowardly as well, because the Prime Minister, when asked if he repeated it in public, didn't say it.
It may be irresponsible, and it probably is cowardly. Would you censor it, Mike?
I wouldn't, but I'd say it's up to the individuals who hold power and responsibility to use their words carefully, because not all of us have the weight and influence that Boris Johnson does, or indeed the power that he does as well. And the fact that those scenes happened this week should be a very careful reminder that when he's cornered, Boris Johnson does tend to resort to some fairly rum tactics in order to try and get out of any form of scrutiny. That, in my opinion, is why he should resign.
Okay.
Well, that's fair enough. You know, it's a political matter, and we're allowed to comment on it. Right, but you know, the long hand of the law has grown considerably with the civil service, with the criminal justice system. The numbers of police are down. I'd be a bit more interested if they stopped trying to go after people for what they think, for hate crimes and thought crimes, then, you know, they came around the elected politician. It can be an MP. The principle's the same. It's all about Boris.
Okay.
It's about whether political representatives should be treated to this kind of stuff. You know, they should be demanded to resign. And you are eloquent in that case, Mike. But that's very different from a copper coming around their door and us saying, "Oh, well, go ahead, you know, no problem."
Oh no, but James, if a copper came to knock on Boris Johnson's door, he would be holding him to account for something that he would, as the police, they would be holding him to account for a law that he'd broken.
Yes.
And then the political bit happens, right? The Tory MPs decide if they can stomach that. The electorate decide if they can stomach that. Boris Johnson himself decides if he has the authority to continue to govern under those circumstances. The police's role in that is to simply decide whether or not he's done something wrong. That's their job.
Well, you can look at it that way, but you know, how much confidence do you have in the police?
Well, I think we need to maintain at least a shred. I mean, I know for sure that the confidence has been absolutely hammered, and I hold no candle for what's happened in the last couple of years, James. But I think that we have to hold on to at least a shred of belief that they are acting on behalf of the people and are able, at least at some levels, to do that.
Well, I doubt that. You know, you yourself speak of a shred, and if you're hanging on a shred of the independence of the police and the judiciary to nearly arrest or whatever it is, you know, to take measures against an elected politician, I think it's a very dangerous step.
Okay, well, hold that thought.
You asked for precedent. You only have to look at Turkey or anywhere else where the police have that kind of power, and you know, the results go to pieces.
Okay, hold that thought. Well, listen, we'll come back to that because we've got to take a break. But I want to talk about Krista Dick as well.